So we move onward to chapter 18. Here we cover the present, middle, and passive indicative. That is the present tense, the middle and passive voice, and the indicative mood. Key terms: primary, middle, passive personal endings, agent, intervocalic sigma, sounds interesting, deponent verb, and middle voice. So let's review voice in English. We have the active voice. With the active voice, the subject is performing the action. You ate 6 donuts. In contrast is the passive voice. With the passive voice, the subject is receiving the action. 6 donuts were eaten by you. Lesser known is the passive aggressive voice. You ate 6 donuts and I didn't get any. Don't worry, it's cool. I can see donuts are very important to you. Okay, not really. Just a joke. We have the active and the passive. And let's look at this a little closer. The active voice, Claudia bit the sandwich. And the passive, Claudia was bit by the sandwich. An unlikely scenario, but a nice example grammatically of the passive. Now with the passive voice, we can have either completed aspect or continuous aspect. When we form the passive voice in the present, we use the helping verb is, am, or are, and it's that helping verb that tells you the tense. The helping verb is, am, are tells you that this is present. But to complete the passive, we need the past participle, as in I am defeated, past passive completed. We can also form the passive in the continuous, so we still use the helping verb, am, is, or are, but now we need to add being to make it passive, followed by the past participle defeated. I am being defeated. So I am defeated, a simply completed action. I am being defeated is an action in process. And again, I am eaten versus I am being eaten. 4 examples of the present passive in English. Notice with those first 4 examples, who performed the action is not actually made explicit. Remember, the subject is receiving the action, not performing it. The one who performs the action of a passive verb is called the agent. Now, the agent can be made inexplicit or it can be made explicit, as in this final example. I am being eaten by a shark. Now, had we eliminated the agent, we would simply have I am being eaten, which would make little sense out of context. But if we're floating in the middle of the ocean, it would make a lot of sense to assume that that was a shark. And often that's why the agent is omitted, simply because it's already obvious from context. So let's look at the present passive indicative in Greek. If you remember, to form the active, we basically have 3 parts of the verb: the stem, a connecting vowel, and primary active personal endings. I prefer to think of the second 2 going together as a unit, but technically there are 3 parts. So lu, men, we loose. To form the passive, we're going to use the stem followed by a connecting vowel. But now instead of using the primary active set of personal endings, we'll use the primary middle passive set of personal endings. The second of 4 sets of personal endings you'll learn in Greek. So it'll look, for example, like this: luamai, I am being loosed, or I am loosed. So to review the active personal endings, the bare personal endings look like this. Remember that changes occur partly because of the connecting vowel, partly because of the loss of certain letters, as in the third person plural. The middle passive set of personal endings looks like this, and it's much more easily memorized. My, sai, tai, metha, sta, ntai. Say it. My, sai, tai, metha, sta, ntai. My, sai, tai, metha, sta, ntai. My, sai, tai, metha, sta, ntai. Okay, learning Greek's all about repetition, so get in the habit of doing that. That was a 5-second study session that you do as you turn off your computer when this lesson is over. So here's what the complete paradigm looks like. We use the verb luo again, but now combining lu with our connecting vowel and primary middle passive personal endings, we end up with luamai, luwe, luatai, luamatha, luistha, luantai. Now all of that looks pretty good, except, of course, the second person singular. Where's our sai and our mai sai tai? What we have here is something called an intervocalic sigma. If we have our stem lu and our connecting vowel epsilon, separating the stem from the personal ending, now we have a sigma caught between two vowels. That intervocalic sigma is going to drop out, and several other changes will then occur before we get to lue. So how does this happen? The intervocalic sigma seems to be destroyed in some way by the epsilon and the alpha that it's caught between. Either it's smothered to death by these two vocalic lovers, or it's in a some kind of competition for the sigma, torn to pieces and absolutely destroyed, at which point it goes away. Epsilon and alpha are left there in the destruction and stare each other in the face as if for the first time. And they come together, and by rule, epsilon and alpha form a baby eta. Now, the Yoda, upon this horrid sight, becomes terrified and jumps down beneath the eta as if to hide. And linguistically, that's the technical explanation for what's happened. That intervocalic sigma is also sometimes called an intergalactic sigma. Not technically, but just as a kind of fun explanation for where that sigma goes. Up into the stratosphere. Now to agency in Greek. Again, we don't have to name the agent with a passive verb. When a speaker chooses to make the agent explicit, they will do so using hupa plus the genitive. So if you remember, hupa is a preposition, and hupa governs an object in the genitive. So we have here in bold, hupa tu patras. So the sentence says, all things to me have been given. Now that passive form is not a passive form you've learned yet. You'll get to it. All things to me have been given by the Father of me. You see how the agent is made explicit with hupa plus the genitive. Now that's one of several ways to name an agent in Greek. Another way is to use the dative case alone. This time we have all things were made, and now we have the dative. Now this can be very confusing for students at first, because you learn that the dative is translated to, and you become very committed to that, and you want every dative to be to. But I have to tell you, not every dative will be translated to. As we move on, you'll see that there are several possible translations for the dative, and you'll have to choose based on the context which one is best. Here, because this is clearly from the context an agent, we're not going to say all things were made to the word, but all things were made by the word of God and the genitive. And the word here refers to the second person of the Christian Trinity, the Son, not the Bible. Okay, now we move to the present middle indicative. This is a third voice in Greek that is difficult to grasp at first, but we'll see if we can make sense of this for you. So the middle and the passive are both going to be formed exactly the same way. Stem plus connecting vowel plus primary active personal endings. Luamai. There are some verbs, however, that by their very nature cannot be passive. And so when they come in this form, we need to call them middle. So they'll be formed in the same way, but look at this verb erchomai. Erchomai means to come. Now, you can think of the act of coming as an active act, but it's impossible to make this a passive act. And in this sense, it's probably best categorized as middle. And again, the nature of the middle I'll explain just now. So look at luo. That's an active voice verb, and it means I loose. The subject is performing the action. Put luo in the passive, and we have luomai. Of course, that form could be middle, but for the sake of argument, let's say it's passive in the context, and it would mean I am loosed. Now look at erkomai. It's a middle verb, and it means I come or go. You see how that could be conceived as an active act, but it cannot be conceived as a passive act. I can't go a person, and because I can't go a person, I can't be gone by a person. Instead, we have the middle voice. Dunamai is another good example of a pure middle. It means I am able or I am strong. Now, is that an active action? It's not really an active action. Is this an action that can be done to the subject? Not really. You see, it stands somewhere between the active and the passive. That's the middle voice. In the middle voice, the subject participates in the action in some special way. In some cases where the subject is performing the action upon itself, and in many cases with the subject simply resting in a particular state, as we have with dunamai. I am able, I am strong. So erkomai becomes our paradigm word for the middle because erkomai inherently has a middle meaning, to come or go. And you see again the problem in the second person singular where our intervocalic sigma has been destroyed, smothered, torn to pieces by its two vocalic lovers on either side. Now there's something that philologists have long referred to as deponent verbs. This category is a legitimate category in study of Latin. For a long time it's been used in the study of Greek. The word here comes from actually a Latin word pono, which means to put, and the Latin prefix de, which means away. So to put or to lay aside. In what way would a deponent verb be laying something aside? A deponent verb has been defined as a verb that is passive in form but active in meaning. Passive in form but active in meaning. What then has it laid aside? Well, some say that it's laid aside its passive meaning for an active. While this category is still often used by many Greek scholars and in many Greek classrooms, more and more Greek scholars are taking exception to this category as illegitimate. Why is that? They argue that these verbs are not passive in form but active in meaning, but rather middle in form and middle in meaning. Remember that the passive and middle are identical in form. So when we see that form, could it just be middle? And if the form seems to be active, we might ask ourselves, is it really closer to a middle meaning? So what we're going to see is many verbs of the nature of erkomai and dunamai are going to be categorized simply as middle. Let's not categorize them as deponent, despite the fact that Mounce uses this language. Just don't. Present, middle, passive, indicative of contract verbs. Now, you learned contract verbs in the previous chapter. The rules are exactly the same here. We have stem plus connecting vowel plus personal endings, but now it's going to look a little different because of the contractions that occur. What contractions have created the vowels here? Where does this omega come from? Stem agapa followed by an omicron connecting vowel. By rule, an omicron swallows up an alpha and becomes an omega, the supreme vowel, agapomai. So were you to go through each of these forms, remembering your rules of contraction, this would explain perfectly why you end up with the vowels that you do here. And the same for poieo. Go through the rules, and these are the forms you get. I do think, however, that the best way to learn the contract vowel conjugations is simply to pronounce the endings over and over and over and over and over and over. And where you stumble, where you question whether you've got it right, invoke your contract rules to see if you can work through to the correct form. So here with poieo we have poiumai, poie, poietai, poiumitha, poiestha, poiuntai. Poiumai, poie, poietai, poiumitha, poiestha, poiuntai. And that's how you learn it. You don't say it twice, you don't say it once, and you probably do better than say it just twice. I would try to do it 3 times in a row in good rhythm. And the same for pleraho. Plerumai, pleroi, plerutai, plerumitha, plerustha, pleruntai. Plerumai, pleroi, plerutai, plerumitha, plerustha, pleruntai. And that brings us into the chapter. With your vocabulary, I implore you, make flashcards and practice your snowballing technique. Every chapter, you're adding a layer to your ball of snow, and every layer that's added around that, those inner layers become harder and harder into ice, solidifying those words in your memory. Where those outer layers that you're just adding will easily fall away until they've been reviewed and reviewed and reviewed and then surrounded by further layers of new words. So carry that ball, the whole snowball with you every chapter you go. Don't just study the new words, study the whole snowball, adding a new layer. And the next chapter, the same. Do so, and you now know 71.33% of the total word count in the New Testament. That's amazing.